on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Jack Smith, the special counsel appointed by Merrick Garland to investigate Trump, announced the indictment of President Trump yesterday. 4 counts related to January 6th. Here's Jack Smith offering political commentary in defense of said indictment.
The attack on our nation's capital on January 6th, 2021 was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. The men and women of law enforcement who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6th are heroes. They are patriots, and they are the very best of us. They did not just defend a building or the people sheltering in it. They put their lives on the line to defend who we are as a country and as a people. They defended the very institutions and principles that define the United States.
Mm-hmm. They stopped this coup attempt by Trump and his conspirators. That's what Jack Smith would have you believe. You're seeing reporting this morning from the indictment that, it goes to his state of mind. He was saying false things that he knew were false in furtherance of this conspiracy. In one of the statements that's pulled that I'm seeing reported everywhere, him allegedly saying to Mike Pence, "You're too honest." Well, in contravention to that claim, John Solomon reporting in Just the News that just days before Trump's indictment yesterday, former New York Police Commissioner Bernie Kerik turned over to Jack Smith a trove of documents that show the Trump legal team was still conducting a sprawling police-like probe that hadn't resolved most of the allegations of 2020 election fraud it had collected before the riot on January 6th occurred. He was running the investigation. Bernie Kerik was at the direction of Rudy Giuliani, unsurprisingly. And a lawyer involved in producing the documents to Jack Smith told JustTheNews.com that the memos could provide to be valuable evidence of the state of mind of the former president's legal team that undercuts the theory that prosecutors laid out in the indictment of an intentional fraud conspiracy between Trump and these unnamed co-conspirators, one of whom is Giuliani and others John Eastman, names you've heard before.
Sidney Powell.
Right. And so, that also speaks to the idea that you have these lawyers that are running around saying we're going to release the Kraken, and Lynn Wood is out at rallies saying this thing was rigged and so on and so forth. And those were Trump's election attorneys pursuing his electoral and legal interests. And so you would argue that he was relying on their advice and counsel. That's potentially part of the argument. In the indictment itself, there's 4 counts. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and a conspiracy against Americans' rights to vote and have their vote counted. Mm-hmm. And how did they go about executing this conspiracy? Well, in the manner and means section of the indictment, it speaks to use knowingly false claims of election fraud to get state legislators and election officials to subvert legitimate election results, or attempt to, I guess. Organizing fraudulent slates of electors in 7 targeted states. Use the power and authority of the Justice Department to conduct sham election crime investigations. Attempt to enlist VP Pence, and so on and so forth. Those are the highlights, actually.
Right, but it's important to note that Trump was not charged with seditious conspiracy or insurrection.
Or inciting a riot. What he was charged what he was charged with is making illegitimate legal claims, essentially, making arguments that were unsupported by the evidence. Those are speech. That is speech, and those are not speech crimes. That is not inciting a riot. That is not yelling fire in a crowded theater. That's making an argument about what a vice president can or cannot do in terms of the certification of the election, what you can or can't do at the state level, making arguments about evidence of the election being rigged or votes not being counted or votes being counted that shouldn't have been counted. Those are just arguments. That's not a conspiracy. That's a challenge to outcome. And that distinction is lost here. And by the way, just one point here. You can simultaneously believe two things, which this seems to completely evade the consciousness of the press corps and the Never-Trumpers and the rest of the goon squad here that believes the ends justify the means. And that's how we preserve our democracy, rather than what they're actually doing, which is cheerleading the demise of the republic. You can believe that Trump exercised bad judgment and his legal arguments were specious, and the arguments that were made in court in the form of complaints or in public forums in the form of trying to persuade people that the election was, you can argue all of that was baseless, unsupported, it was silly, and still say, well, it's not a crime, though. That's not a crime. You're allowed to say things that are false. You're allowed to advance legal theories that people disagree with. That's why we have courts of law. And you're even allowed to advance an argument that's unconstitutional or that will be found to be unconstitutional. Otherwise, every ruling of the Supreme Court about the constitutionality of something should send someone to prison. Whoever was arguing the position determined to be unconstitutional, they should go to prison now. They were undermining the republic. They were conspiring to defraud people of this and that. Jonathan Turley opining on this yesterday.
Smith is willing to take a former president to court on a hope and a prayer. And I don't think he has a prayer. I think that ultimately, even if he can eke out a conviction, I cannot imagine how this would stand an appellate review unless he's withholding evidence that we haven't seen. I mean, this is a speaking indictment, but it doesn't say very much. It basically just says that we think Trump is lying, that he actually didn't believe this. I mean, I can't tell you how facially ridiculous this claim is. It starts out by saying, well, you know, of course you could say false things in a campaign, but then says, but Trump knew they were false. So is that the test going forward in terms of criminalizing political speech? The Supreme Court in a case called Alvarez said that a politician who had lied about military decorations could not be constitutionally prosecuted for those lies. So Smith is going to have to not just bulldoze through the First Amendment, he's going to have to bulldoze through a line of cases by the Supreme Court.
So you have to go to state of mind when politicians lie, which, I don't know.
Happens every day.
Well, in every campaign, and every day they're in office, to some extent or another, massaging the truth, if you want to call it that. But these are all now prosecutable offenses, or they're going to argue this line. They're going to say, well, no, it's not that. It's if you act on it. Well, you're acting on a theory that you think may be dubious, but it's in your interest to act on. So, your electoral political interest. Well, again, this is why you have election authorities and courts of law to adjudicate these matters. And they did. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by George Parry, former federal and state prosecutor, regular contributor to the American Spectator. He blogs at knowledgeisgood.net. George, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Nice to be with you.
So your perspective on this, is criminalizing political speech with which people disagree. Is Jonathan Turley just articulated? Is that your view?
Yeah, I mean, the indictment says, well, Trump had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and even to claim falsely that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election. He can tell those lies, but what he can't do is act on those lies. Well, how do you go about acting on those lies, according to the prosecutor? Well, he took action to have state officials investigate potential voter fraud. That was one of the acts. He worked with his conspirators, according to the prosecution, to submit substitute electors in 7 states, and he tried to persuade Vice President Pence that he had the power to refuse to count electoral votes on January 6th. Now, these may be totally wacky legal theories, but Trump was being told this not by a bunch of strip mall lawyers, but by very well qualified legal counsel. And they may have all the wrong theories, but seeking or soliciting state officials to hunt for voter fraud, that's not criminal. Even if you believe there was no voter fraud, that's not criminal.
Also, that distinction between, like, you can say it, but you can't act upon it. Well, isn't the President of the United States saying it, acting upon it? He's trying to persuade people. He's trying to persuade election authorities. So so I can think it, but I can't say it because saying is acting on it. So it's that you get to the same place.
Yeah, well, look, you know what I immediately thought of when I read this? This, by the way, is just, they stretch conspiracy theory to the breaking limit with this one. But I immediately thought of Bush v. Gore in 2000, the hanging Chad election down in Florida. The Al Gore people wanted a recount of the vote only in heavily Democrat counties. And the Republicans said, well, if we're going to have a recount, it could be statewide. And the Supreme Court ultimately said, yeah, it's got to be statewide. Well, was Al Gore and his cohort, were they criminals? Because they were advocating something that was clearly illegal. You can't have a selective recount only in certain counties. It's patently and clearly illegal. That's what they advocated. Yeah. Now, under this theory, advanced by the prosecutor here, Al Gore's a criminal. What about going forward?
They knew if you know or should have known something is not provided by law and you advocate for it, then you get prosecuted by the federal government. That's the new standard.
Yeah, you go to prison. Nice theory. And the potential, I mean, this potentially criminalizes, all kinds of political activity. So if you disagree with the outcome of an election and you act on that, you take action to change the outcome of the election, you're a criminal. I mean, what does that do to political discourse in this country? What does that do to the politics, advocating for something, taking action on those beliefs, even if you don't believe it, but you're acting on it? That's politics. That's been the history of politics in this country from the beginning, and now they want to criminalize it. The real point here is that there are 2 things at work here. Number one, it's lawfare. It's just a continuation of the Trump-Russia collusion smear. Crossfire Hurricane, what the FBI did to him, special counsel, and on and on and on. And now they've indicted him for this. And what they're accomplishing is they're getting him to spend millions of dollars to defend against these baseless criminal charges. And that, to me, is what's really at work here. And by the way, I didn't see anything in here that they couldn't have alleged within weeks of the election being over. Once Biden was certified as the winner, they could have gone ahead and brought charges against Trump. Why did they wait 2.5 years? Why are these charges being brought now? Yeah.
So
this whole thing is.
Yeah. President Trump goes to court tomorrow. Is there any chance he'll be held on pretrial detention?
hey, anything's possible in this setup. The charges are brought in D.C., Washington, D.C. The judge assigned to the case is an Obama-nominated judge, so anything's possible. I wouldn't be surprised if they put him in handcuffs and took him to join the January 6th protesters at the D.C. jail.
I smell a jailbreak if that occurs. I mean, honestly,
that would be something.
We talk about this, and we've talked to you about this so many times because there's been so many indictments to discuss. And you almost become numb to it, but you can't become numb to it. The implications of a prosecution like this, are so profound. They're as profound as a prosecution can be when it comes to our God-given constitutional rights going forward. You talk about going forward. Going forward, you have set a precedent now that you can't unset, regardless of the outcome of this case. And as I said earlier, there is going to be enormous political pressure for the next Republican president, whoever that may be, whenever that may occur, to apply this same standard to political rivals. And I'm not saying they should, because I don't think we should. I always say we could be them, they couldn't be us, and we should guard that difference jealously. But there's going to be enormous political pressure and enormous populist political opportunity to go tit for tat, and that's just going to further the disintegration of our freedoms, as far as I see.
Well, look, the erosion of respect for the rule of law in this country just continues apace. These things are going to wind up getting settled in the streets if these people keep this kind of nonsense up. Mm-hmm. But keep in mind, too, that, as I've said many times, when you come to the criminal law, the process is the punishment. Putting Trump through this, requiring him to spend these millions and millions of dollars, requiring him to defend himself in a court of law, that's the punishment. Whether they could ever get a conviction, and by the way, in front of a D.C. jury, they could charge Trump with Lindbergh kidnapping and they would convict him of it.
Right.
But the point here is they're putting Trump through this, number one, to activate or energize their political base, that is the Democrat political base,
and his
rehashing this whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's the irony here. Every time he gets hit with one of these indictments, his polling goes up. And there is one theory out there that the Democrats want Trump to be the nominee because they think they can beat him in a general election.
There's no question. That's what they think.
But what about President Trump's right to due process? Is it being restricted? I mean, you have 3 different trials that are going on. I mean, the civil trial in New York is supposed to go to trial in October, a Mar-a-Lago document case next May, and then he's trying to run for president. I mean, how much can a man handle?
Well, I find the guy to be remarkably tough. I mean, most people would be in a closet sucking their thumbs by this point. And there's another charge coming down in Atlanta. Don't be under any misapprehension about that. You got another Democrat DA down there who's going to charge Trump with election interference in Georgia.
She's foaming at the mouth to do that. She can't wait.
Yeah, right. And then the Lindbergh baby prosecution happens after that. George Parry, former federal and state prosecutor, regular contributor to the American Spectator. He blogs at knowledgeisgood.net. George, thank you as always.
Okay, thank you.
We'll see you at the next indictment. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM